Guys, if you've been around the channel, you probably know I am a professional motorcycle instructor certified under MSF curriculum and by Harley Davidson. And I've taught hundreds of students. And oftentimes those students will ask questions like, well, so-and-so told me I should be doing this, or so-and-so said I shouldn't be doing this, but you guys are telling us something completely opposite. Guys, my name is Rick and this is the HDVIBE channel. In today's video, we're going to address some of those tips that these students sometimes get, and we even as experienced riders get these unsolicited tips from such characters such as Cousin Eddie, Uncle Joe, or maybe Hardcore Biker Dude. And we'll get into all that right after this. Before we get into the heart of today's video, and we have some guests that are going to join us today, Cousin Eddie, Uncle Joe, and Hardcore Biker Dude. What I asked you guys to do, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, leave a comment down below, whether you like it or not, whether you agree or disagree, I'd really appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that button right down here, that really helps out the channel. And when you do subscribe, leave a comment down below saying I subscribe so I can personally reach out and thank you for supporting the channel. I also want to thank everybody who has supported the channel for just a little bit over 3 years, a couple of weeks over 3 years at the time this video is released. We have surpassed 12,000 subscribers and we just recently went over 2 million views. So guys, thank you very much for your support, and that really keeps me going to put out this weekly content. One more thing before we get into the video, I do want to remind you that motorcycle drop guards are something that I have on my 2 street glides that help me get over that fear of dropping my motorcycle and damaging it. And if you didn't see a video a few weeks ago, I have a special code, HDVIBE 2024, that right now will give you the biggest discount that JM Motorcycle Drop Guards has offered, and that is 35%. I will have links to motorcycledropguards.com down in the description, as well as that discount code. And again, that discount code, 35% off, is going to be for a limited time. So if you've been on the fence about getting drop guards to get out and practice slow speed skills so you become a more confident rider, now is the time to go check those out. Today we're going to hear from Cousin Eddie, Uncle Joe, and Hardcore Biker Dude with 3 tips that they give, and a lot of my students have gotten from these types of characters, and it sometimes confuses people. So a little bit of background on Cousin Eddie. So he has a motorcycle endorsement and he rides often, but he never took any courses. He never took the basic rider course. He went to the DMV and he passed it. So Cousin Eddie got one piece of advice when he took his motorcycle endorsement test from the examiner. And let's listen to this and maybe you can figure out what piece of advice he got from that examiner that stuck with him over the years.
Are you serious, Clark? You bought one of them motorcycles? Well, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Only use that rear brake if you're coming to stop, and never pull that front brake because you go flying over those handlebars.
All right, so did you hear it, guys? Cousin Eddie says don't use anything but that rear brake when you're coming to a stop, because if you grab or use that front brake, you're going to go flying over the handlebars. Cousin Eddie probably got that piece of advice from that examiner. Back in the day, often people would say that, don't use the front brake, because they thought about it when you were riding bicycles and had that front handbrake and you had those rear brakes, and people said just use the rear brake because that way you won't fly over the handlebars. Well, is that really true? Is that a tip that we should go by, or is that a tip that we should ignore? Based upon the training I have and what we teach in the MSF Basic Rider course, when you are coming to a stop, you need to utilize both brakes to get the shortest stopping distance. So the reason I say that is you get 70% of your stopping power by the front brake. You get 30% stopping power by your rear brake. If you use both of those brakes appropriately at the same time, you're going to get 100% of your stopping power. So what does that mean? If I only use the rear brake, I'm only going to get 30% of my stopping power. And if you're coming up to an intersection, you have to stop quickly and you're only jamming on that rear brake, what's going to happen? More than likely, you're going to end up in the middle of that intersection, exposing yourself to potential cars taking off as that light changes. So what should you do instead? Well, I would suggest use 100% of your braking power when you're at speed going down the road. Use that front and rear brake. use threshold braking, and practice that braking out in a parking lot so you get accustomed to using both of those brakes and it becomes muscle memory. Well, now in one respect, Cousin Eddie might be correct in that the time you should only use that rear brake is when you're doing slow speed skills. So that's probably something under 8 miles an hour, maybe even under 10 miles an hour where you're doing very tight maneuvers and you need a little bit of rear brake to steady or balance out that bike. And when you're doing those slow speed maneuvers, using that rear brake should be very, very lightly. And really you want to get to the point in slow speed maneuvers is you're controlling everything with your clutch. You're using good friction zone and you're using good clutch control to control that bike and not having to rely on that rear brake to make those tight turns. What I like to say in slow speed maneuvers is use that rear brake as an aid. Don't think of it as your crutch to make those tight turns. Now let's move on to our next character. Our next character is Uncle Joe. Here's some background about Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe has never ridden a motorcycle, but he knows how to use a manual transmission. Well, not on a motorcycle, but on the 1952 truck that he learned how to drive on. So let's hear what Uncle Joe has to say.
Well, I got one piece of advice for you. Never ride that clutch. I learned how to drive a 3 on the tree in 1952, and if you ride that clutch, you're going to burn that thing out quicker than you can say howdy doody.
So Uncle Joe says don't ride the clutch when you're learning how to ride or riding that motorcycle. Well, Uncle Joe, that may be the case in a 1952 truck, but on a motorcycle, today's modern motorcycles, the reason you need to use that friction zone is to control your speed, especially at slow speeds. You need to stay in that friction zone when you're taking off from an intersection, from a stop. You need to use that friction zone when you're doing slow speed turns or if you need to make a 90-degree turn. The last thing you want to do is give it throttle and let that clutch fly and that bike jumps and gets out of control from you. That is how the friction zone, riding that clutch, is the reason you can control that bike, especially at slow speeds or when you're taking off or when you're coming into a stop. So why might Uncle Joe say don't ride the clutch? Well, there's a couple reasons. Back in the day, car clutches, if you had a manual transmission, those were dry clutches, so those clutch plates could wear out very easily, and that's why people always say don't ride your clutch. But if you're on a modern day motorcycle, those clutches are wet clutches. So what does that mean? There's oil around those plates, and these motorcycles are made for staying in that friction zone, using that clutch, riding that clutch to properly control that motorcycle at slow speeds, as well as when you're getting up to speeds or making tight turns. Uncle Joe is correct in that you shouldn't ride a clutch when you're in a car and you have a manual transmission, which those in today's environment are very hard to find. But when you're on that motorcycle, use that friction zone, stay in that friction zone, millimeters of movement, especially when you're practicing slow speed skills. So the third character in today's video is Hardcore Biker Dude. So what does Hardcore Biker Dude typically represent? Well, typically he doesn't even have a motorcycle endorsement. He probably has never taken a course. He doesn't practice slow speed skills and, well, he's kind of learned on his own. So let's hear from Hardcore Biker Dude.
Brother, I've been riding Harley Davidsons for 40 years now, and I'm hardcore. I don't understand why you guys do all this practicing in parking lots and driving around in circles and taking classes. That's for sissies. Get out there and ride on the road and really learn how to ride.
Hardcore Biker Dude, you said don't practice in a parking lot. So how did you learn how to ride?
Here's how I learned how to ride. One time I was out in Sturgis in 1977. I was going down Sturgis Main Street at 75 miles an hour, and some cager pulled out in front of me. Well, I avoided getting killed by pulling those brakes, and I slid. I laid her down, and that saved my life. That's how you learn how to ride.
Well, guys, I gotta say, Hardcore Biker Dude couldn't be further from what you should be doing when you're learning how to ride a bike or even becoming more proficient and confident at riding that bike. You need to practice in the parking lot, whether that's braking like Hardcore Biker Dude, you need to practice emergency braking. And I did do a full video on that, which I'll link right up here as well as down in the description. So you can see some of the exercises that I do to practice emergency braking. Now, as far as the reason why you should practice in a parking lot, even slow speed maneuvers, because what does it do? You learn clutch control, you learn throttle control, you learn, more importantly, to turn your head in the direction you want to go so that you're not having issues making turns or getting through curves even at speed. Again, where you look is where that bike is going to go. So practicing in a parking lot gives you that muscle memory of turning that head well before you want to make a turn and looking where you want to go, not where you have been. So again, Hardcore Biker Dude probably couldn't be farther from the truth, and honestly, I don't know if there's anything that's valid in the statements that he made. Guys, that's 3 characters that I often hear these types of tips coming from, and for the most part, those 3 tips you should probably ignore and take some of the advice from either a professional motorcycle instructor or someone who you really trust, who has taken courses, who practices regularly, and has good knowledge of how to operate a motorcycle, and is not Cousin Eddie, Uncle Joe, or Hardcore Biker Dude. Guys, with that, I want to leave you with this thought. Life is short. Get out and ride the bike. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye now.